he appeals to Achilles' compassion. And Achilles yields, and the two men collapse together in an acknowledgement of their human identity. They're no longer Greek and Trojan. They're no longer deadly enemies. Instead, they are like father and son.
It is here where Homer reveals his subversive mission. He ends what is perhaps the world's greatest war story with an anti-war message.
We are all human. We are all fathers and sons. We all have attachments that go way beyond our national identity. We are human beings, first and foremost.
A truce is declared for the cremation of Hector's body. Funeral laments are sung. The flames from the fire consume his corpse, and looming are the walls of Troy.
Homer does not elect for a Hollywood ending. He elects for an ending which reminds us that more slaughter is to follow. Homer is saying to us, his audience, in a way, you are not to be trusted. More havoc will surely follow. More brutality, more carnage, and ultimately, too, the destruction of Troy.
Although this completes Homer's story, the true story of Troy does not end here. Suddenly, the Greeks are gone, and a wooden horse stands outside the gates of Troy. The greatest Trojan hero, Hector, is dead. Killed in battle by the Greek hero Achilles. After defiling Hector's body, Achilles agrees to surrender Hector's corpse to the Trojans. An uneasy truce is called as Hector is cremated before the walls of Troy. But when dawn breaks and the Trojans brace for another Greek attack, they discover their enemy is gone and a wooden horse stands outside the city gates. This is the true story of Troy. The most famous symbol of Troy, the Trojan horse, comes to us from legends other than Homer's Iliad.
The legend tells us that this was a war that was not won by uncommon acts of valor, by steadfastness and military discipline, all the qualities that we might expect. On the contrary, it was won by a devastating ruse. It was won by deception, deceit, and conspiracy, and all the things that we might consider to be dishonorable in the conduct of warfare.
Everyone knows the story. After 10 years of battle, the Greeks and Trojans fight to a standstill. Then Odysseus comes up with a plan. The Greeks build a giant wooden horse, leave it as an offering to the Trojans, and then sail away. Some Trojans are skeptical. Laocoon warns, beware of Greeks bearing gifts. But myth says he and his sons are silenced by serpents that drag them into the sea. The Trojans desperately want to believe that the horse is a peace offering.
And the Trojans broke their walls down to let the horse enter, stuffed full as it was with Greek soldiers. And in the night, as the Trojans were celebrating the departure of the Greeks, down came the Greeks out of the wooden horse, let in their companions, and proceeded to rape, pillage, and destroy.
By hiding in the belly of the wooden horse and tricking the Trojans into lowering their guard, the Greeks finally penetrate the massive walls of Troy. All of Hector's fears, why he was willing to risk his life to defend his homeland, are about to become true.
Priam was slaughtered at his own altar. Cassandra was raped. And the infant son of Hector was thrown from the walls of Troy, his brains dashed out.
With Hector's mother and father hacked to pieces, his sister sacrificed, his son murdered, and his wife carried off to the bed of a conquering Greek, his family's seed is wiped from the earth forever. For the Greeks, this hard-earned victory means honor restored, the riches of Troy, and Helen. But although there is plenty of archaeological evidence of Troy being destroyed, how could the legend of the Trojan horse be true?
The Trojan horse has become something of a metaphor for trickery, you know, for being able to outwit your opponent, for having something that is so carefully contrived of an artifice that you're given an overwhelming advantage. The idea that the Greeks would have in fact built a large wooden horse, hidden inside it, and had it dragged inside of Troy is certainly possible, but it kind of strains your credulity a little bit that someone really could have pulled that off. My inclination is to see in the Trojan horse some kind of a representation, vaguely remembered, of siege equipment, the weaponry that can be brought up against walls to either bring them down or to somehow neutralize them.
Hittites and Assyrians possessed siege technology. It's possible this Bronze Age weapon of mass destruction could have inspired the legend of the Trojan horse. But whether history or myth, the Trojan horse came to symbolize a war won by trickery and deception.
What the legend seems to be telling us is that even though this war was fought for a just cause of sorts, and even though in the end right won, in the sense that the Greeks were victors, nonetheless, that victory was at such cost that it put into question the whole validity of the war itself.
Achilles meets his death, struck in his heel by an arrow from the bow of Paris. Odysseus is doomed to wander for another 10 long years before he gets home. Menelaus readies to kill Helen, his unfaithful wife, but when he sees her naked beauty, drops his sword. They too take 10 years to find their way back to Sparta. And as for Agamemnon, on his first night home in Mycenae, Clytemnestra, his queen, having never forgiven her husband for the sacrifice of their daughter, assassinates him in his victory bath.
So the homecoming of the Greeks was for them as devastating as was the destruction of Troy.
In fact, history tells us in the wake of the Trojan War, not only do the Mycenaean kingdoms collapse, but the entire Bronze Age comes to an end. There is much speculation as to its cause: civil war, outside invaders, or a string of devastating earthquakes. Greece falls into a dark age for nearly the next 500 years, until the time of Homer. What survives through the Dark Ages is the story of Troy.
If you contextualize this war and you see what comes after that, the decline, the catastrophes, the economic collapse, the Greeks never managed again for the next 400 years to come together as a nation. That was most probably the last glorious event before the disintegration, before the dissolution and the fragmentation of the Mycenaean world. And I think that's why it stayed in the memory.
And as Homer sings stories of Troy, the rage of Achilles, the beauty of Helen, and the valor of Hector, his songs inspire the invention of the Greek alphabet. The Iliad and Odyssey become the foundation of Western literature, and Troy is emblazoned forever into the history of the world.
The Iliad and the Odyssey had enormous impact in the Archaic period, the 7th, 6th, 5th centuries BC. And so, by extension, it's not surprising that people wanted to go to the site where that war was believed to have taken place. Then the residents realized that they need to market the city very aggressively, almost like a Disneyland of antiquity.
The site of Troy rises from ruin to major tourist destination. Ancient burial mounds are turned into monuments to Greek and Trojan heroes. Temples and theaters are built to their gods. And maidens reenact scenes from the fall of Troy.
They would sing sections of the Iliad and the Odyssey in the agora, in the marketplace of the city, right in front of the old Bronze Age fortification walls.
As the city is rebuilt, history and myth become one, and Troy becomes a war prize in a worldwide conflict.
The Trojan War, among other things, resonates because, from the perspective of many people in antiquity down to the present time, it was a conflict between East and West.
In a way, it's the beginning of the combative stances of both sides. It's us against them.
Now, the tourist destination of Troy attracts more than just tourists. First, Persian King Xerxes stops at the site in 480 BC on his way to sack Greece, claiming to avenge his Trojan ancestors. Then in 334 BC, Alexander the Great stops at Troy to pay homage to Achilles on his way to Persia.
He goes to the Temple of Athena, where he saw a range of armaments associated with the Trojan War. And he looked at the armor that was presented there, chose one set of armor to wear himself in his battle against the Persians. I like to think that it would be that of Achilles, although we don't know that for certain, and then goes off to fight the Persians wearing Trojan War armor.
Alexander the Great conquers Persia, avenging Greece and reclaiming Troy as part of the Western world. Just as Alexander links himself to the Greek hero Achilles, Julius Caesar claims lineage to the Trojan hero Aeneas. And Rome adopts Troy as its mother city. But the Romans embrace more than a mythological connection to Troy. They also model their ideal soldier on that of Trojan hero Hector.
The Romans would say that the ideal soldier was disciplined, was a team player, was willing to sacrifice himself for the welfare of others, was willing to efface his personal glory for the good of the whole.
The military success of the Roman legions is a tribute to the legacy of the Trojans. Even though the Greeks originally defeat the Trojans are avenged when Rome battles Greece.
It's ironic that the Trojan refugees led by Aeneas are purported to have been the ancestors of the Romans, and the Romans in turn conquered the Greeks. And so it's as if history came full circle. The Trojans were conquered and then became the conquerors.
Troy and its stories are the oldest uninterrupted memories of our world. Troy is beauty, language, power, sacrifice, vanity, honor, deceit, and war. From literature to archaeology, history to mythology, Homer to Hollywood, we believe so strongly in Troy that the question of whether it is real or not hardly seems to matter.